The alkali flat was a white, blinding mirror, and Juliet Reed was dying. Her lips were cracked, her hope a dried-up riverbed. She had one sip left in her canteen, one sip between her and oblivion. Then she saw him. A broken man half buried in the dust, his hand feebly scratching at the ground. He was a stranger, likely a dead man. But when he groaned, she was faced with a choice that would rewrite her life, or end it her last drop of water. Or his. The sun was a hammer. It beat down on the cracked earth of the high desert, a place the old maps called the Devil's Anvil. It was a fitting name. Everything here was either baked, broken, or dead. Juliet Reed felt she was all three. It had been 6 days since the axle on their small wagon snapped. 6 days since her husband Robert had looked at her with hollow eyes, his lungs already filling, and whispered, "Go on, Julie. Don't wait." The cholera had come for him fast. It had already taken their 4-year-old son, Thomas, a week before that back on the main trail. Robert had insisted they push on, take a supposed shortcut, away from the contaminated riverbeds of the main wagon train. It was a fatal mistake. Now Juliet was alone. She stood for a moment, steadying herself against a wind-carved pillar of red rock. She looked back at the shallow, stone-piled grave she had left 2 days ago. It was already just a speck, indistinguishable from the rest of the hostile landscape. She was a ghost, haunting her own life. She had left the broken wagon with what little she could carry, a bedroll Roberts rifle, with only 5 cartridges, a knife, and the canteen. The canteen was the most precious. It was her life, and it was almost empty. She unscrewed the cap. Her hand, raw and blistered, trembled violently. She tilted it. The slosh was pathetic. A mouthful, maybe 2. Her thirst was a living thing, a creature with claws hooked deep in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to drink it, to grant herself just 1 more hour of clear-headed walking. Water is life. To waste it was suicide. To give it away. That wasn't even a thought that could form. She was walking west, guided by a crumpled map and a desperate hope for Fort Harmony, a speck of civilization that was supposedly 30 miles further on. 30 miles in this heat might as well be the moon. She rounded a large mesa, the rock formations shifting like grotesque skeletons in the shimmering heat. That's when she saw the buzzards. They circled low, lazy and patient over a jumble of dark boulders. Her first instinct was fear. Bandits. Apaches. But the birds were landing a sure sign their target was stationary, dead, or close to it. Juliet should have turned around. She should have saved her energy. A corpse had nothing for her but a reminder of her own fate. But something the same terrible aching void left by Robert and Thomas pulled her forward. She unholstered Robert's heavy revolver, its weight unfamiliar, and crept closer. He was wedged between 2 rocks, half in shadow, half in the searing sun. He was dressed in worn buckskins, not the clothes of a settler. A dark, ugly stain covered his right side, and the flies were thick on it. He was face down, one arm stretched out, his fingers clawing at the dust. He was not dead. A low, rattling groan escaped his lips as she approached. He was dying. Juliet stared her mind, a blank slate of heat and thirst. This was just another body, another tragedy on the trail. She nudged his boot with her foot. No response, just another ragged breath. She saw the empty canteen lying just beyond his outstretched fingers, uncapped and baked dry. He had already met her fate just a few hours sooner. She felt a grim pity. She turned to leave. Her own survival was the only thing that mattered. She took 2 steps, and the man groaned again. Water. The word was not a word. It was a rasp, a dry scrape of air over a ruined larynx. Juliet stopped. Her hand tightened on her own canteen. She could feel the tiny weight of the water inside. Her water. Her last water. The stranger did not move again. He was a husk. His face, pressed into the dirt, was caked with dried blood and black dust. His hair was a matted tangle. He was big, or had been, but the desert had withered him. Juliet stood over him, a judge holding the power of life and death in a tin canteen. "Walk away," Julie Roberts' voice echoed in her mind. "Survive. You have to survive." She tried. She forced her cracked boots to move. 1 step, 2. The sun beat on the back of her neck. Her own tongue felt like a piece of dry wood in her mouth. That single mouthful of water would sharpen her mind, wet her throat, give her the will to walk for another mile. That mile might be the one that mattered. The man groaned again, louder this time. It was the exact same sound her son Thomas had made in his fever. A sound of helpless, all-consuming need. Juliet's feet stopped moving. She was frozen. This was madness. Giving this man her water wouldn't save him. He was too far gone. He was shot, bleeding, and cooked by the sun. It would be throwing her own life away for nothing. A noble, stupid gesture that the buzzards would appreciate. "Water." He breathed so quiet it was barely sound. She turned back. She looked at the buzzards who had hopped a few feet away, watching her with glittering, impatient eyes. They were waiting for her to leave. They were waiting for both of them. What is the difference? She thought, a strange, fatalistic calm settling over her. Die here, or die a mile from here. She was so tired. The grief for her family had hollowed her out, and this relentless sun had baked away everything else. Everything but one last stubborn ember of the woman she used to be. The woman who ran the church charity. The woman who always had a spare biscuit for a traveler. The woman who had held her dying son and would have traded her own soul for a single drop of clean water to give him. She couldn't save Thomas. She couldn't save Robert. But she was here now, and this man was asking. With a heavy sigh that cracked her lips open, Juliet walked back to the dying stranger. She knelt beside him. "You're a fool, Juliet, read," she whispered to herself. She fumbled with the cap of her canteen. The metal was hot to the touch. She opened it. The smell of the flat, tinny water wafted up, and her stomach clenched with a thirst so profound it was painful. She brought the canteen to her own lips, her hand shaking. She paused, her eyes closed. 1 sip. Just 1 sip for me. Then the rest for him. It was a compromise. But as she started to tilt it, the man's hand twitched. His fingers brushed her boot. Juliet's eyes snapped open. She looked at his parched, split lips. She looked at the flies crawling on his wound. She remembered Thomas. "Damn it all!" She sobbed, a dry, racking sound. She pulled the canteen away from her own face. With a gesture that felt like she was tearing out her own heart, she moved to the man. She carefully slid her hand under his head to lift him from the dirt. He was heavy. He groaned in pain as his wound was disturbed, but his mouth fell open slightly. Gently, she poured her last drop of water onto his lips. It was not a sip. It was barely a thimbleful. The water vanished, instantly soaked into the cracked skin. He coughed a dry spasm. She let the last few drops fall. He choked. His whole body seized. His eyes, which had been squeezed shut, flew open. Juliet recoiled. She had expected to see the vacant, delirious eyes of a dying man. But the eyes staring back at her were a piercing, shockingly clear blue. They were not vacant. They were sharp, intelligent, and blazing with a sudden, terrible awareness. He stared at her. He looked at the empty canteen in her hand. His cracked lips moved. "You—" He rasped, his voice a raw whisper. "You absolute fool." Then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he passed out. Juliet stared at him, the empty canteen hanging uselessly from her hand. The man's words echoed in the silence. "You absolute fool." He was right. She had done it. She had sealed her own fate. A wave of light-headedness and despair washed over her so potent she nearly collapsed. She had given up her last chance for a man who, in his first moment of consciousness, had insulted her. Anger, hot and sudden, briefly eclipsed her thirst. You're welcome," she spat at his unconscious form. She was about to stand up and walk away to find a patch of shade to die in when the man's eyes opened again. This time they stayed open. They were fixed on her. "How many?" he whispered. "How many what? Who's with you?" His voice was stronger, though still a rasp. "No one. I'm alone." The man's sharp blue eyes scanned the surrounding rocks. He seemed to be listening not just to her, but to the desert itself. "Alone. And you gave me your water." He said it not as a question, but as a statement of profound disbelief. "It's done," Juliet said, her voice flat. "It's gone." "Why?" Juliet had no answer. She just shook her head, the grief and exhaustion welling up. "My boy." He was thirsty. The man's gaze softened for just an instant. He understood. He pushed himself up on one elbow, a grimace of pure agony flashing across his face. He looked at the wound in his side. It was a mess of dried blood and buckskin. "Gunshot," he stated. 3 days ago, gangs called the Shaw brothers." "Shaw." Juliet repeated the name, sounding vaguely familiar. She'd heard it whispered in terror at the last trading post. "Bart Shaw." "The same." The man grunted, tearing a piece of his shirt to wipe the grime from his face. Underneath, he was younger than she thought, maybe 40. His face was all angles and sun-scorched leather with a hawk-like nose and those penetrating eyes. He and his men, they ambushed the settler train I was guiding, scattered them. "I got this for my trouble." You're a scout." He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "Something like that. Name's Rowan McCabe." Juliet froze. The name hit her like a physical blow. Rowan Grit McCabe, the scout of the Cimarron. He wasn't just a scout. He was the scout. A living legend. They told stories about him from Santa Fe to the Oregon border. They said he could read the desert like a book, that he'd found water where there was only stone, and that he'd guided 3 separate military expeditions through hostile territory without losing a single man. And she had just given him her last sip of water. "McCabe," she breathed. "Doesn't mean much right now." Rowan grunted, probing the edge of his wound. "Bullets still in, festering. That water you gave me, it bought me an hour, maybe 2. Bought us an hour." "Us. You think I'm going to let the woman who just saved my life die on the devil's anvil? Not on my watch." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "My canteen's over there. My rifle too. Shaw's men took my horse and my pack, but they were in a hurry. Thought I was dead. They missed my gear in the rocks." Juliet saw it now, a high-quality rifle, a Spencer repeating rifle propped against a rock, 10 feet away, along with a bedroll and a large military-style canteen. Is there water?" she whispered, hope a painful, fragile thing. "No, they emptied it," Rowan said. "But that's my gear. I need you to get it. And the canteen. Especially the canteen." Juliet scrambled over the rocks and grabbed the items. The rifle was heavy, much heavier than Robert's. The canteen was empty, as he'd said. She brought them back. Rowan took the canteen. "Thank you, Mom." "Juliet. Juliet Reed." "Juliet." He nodded. "Now listen to me. Your act of foolishness just put us both on the hook. I'm going to get you out of this, but you have to do exactly as I say. I can't walk far. Not with this wound. But I know this land. He looked up at the sun, then at the shadows cast by the rocks. We're 2 miles from a seep. It's not clean, it's bitter, but it's wet. Can you walk 2 miles? I think so. Good. He jammed a piece of his torn shirt into his wound. Help me up. Juliet put her shoulder under his arm. He put his arm around her neck, and with a roar of pain that was half grunt, half curse, he heaved himself to his feet. His entire weight slumped against her. He was a big man, and even withered, he was almost too much for her. Which way? She panted. He didn't point. He just looked. See that notch in the mesa where the rock looks like a broken tooth? Yes. Walk toward it, and stay off the skyline. Keep to the low ground, and hurry. Bart Shaw will be back. He always comes back to count his dead. 50 miles east, Bart Shaw poured the last of his whiskey into a tin cup. He didn't drink it. He just stared into the amber liquid, his face a mask of cold fury. Bart Shaw was not a legend like McCabe. He was a nightmare. He'd run a vicious gang for 10 years, hitting everything from stagecoaches to isolated ranches. He'd been caught once on Rowan McCabe's testimony and had spent 2 horrific years in Yuma Territorial Prison. The scars on his neck from a prison shiv were a constant itching reminder. He had escaped 6 months ago, with one goal to find Rowan McCabe and undo the man's life piece by piece. The settler train ambush hadn't been about the money. It had been about drawing McCabe out. And it had worked. "He's dead, Bart," said a skinny, rat-faced man named Leo Gantry. "You shot him clean. We saw him go down." "If he's dead, I want to see the body," Bart said, his voice a low growl. "McCabe's not human. He's part snake, part coyote. He doesn't die from a gut shot unless you watch him do it." "We've been tracking him for 3 days," complained the third man, a heavy-set brute named Dutch Peterson. "We're wasting time. Let's head for the border." "We're going back," Bart said. The order was final. "I want his scalp. I want the boots he's wearing. I need to see him dead." He threw the whiskey into the fire. It flared, lighting his cold, dead eyes. "Saddle up." They rode hard. Bart Shaw was a tracker, nearly as good as McCabe. But where McCabe read the land with respect, Bart read it with malice. He knew where a wounded man would go. He knew where the water was. It took them a day to get back to the ambush site. They found the jumble of rocks. "See Bart nothin'?" Leo said, gesturing. "The buzzards have picked him clean by—" Leo stopped. Bart had slid from his horse, his eyes narrowed. He walked to the spot where Rowan had fallen. He knelt, touching the dirt. "He was here," Bart whispered. He pointed. "See that the flies. The blood's still wet." "He's crawling?" Dutch asked, unnerved. "No." Bart stood and walked a few paces, his eyes sweeping the ground. He found the spot where Juliet had knelt. Someone was with him. He followed the faint tracks. They were small. A woman. He followed the tracks back to the east, his mind working. It took him 2 hours to find what was left of Juliet's broken-down wagon. He saw the snapped axle. He saw the crude grave. He read the story in the dirt. A widow. Bart said, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. "Left her husband. She's on foot. She found him." He walked back to the ambush site. "And she gave him water." "How can you know that?" Dutch asked. "Because her tracks are with his now. She's helping him. He's leaning on her. They're heading west toward the broken tooth." Bart laughed, a short, ugly sound. "He's making for the seep." He mounted his horse. The hunt was on again, but now it was sweeter. "He thinks he's a legend," Bart Shaw sneered to his men. "He thinks he's some kind of protector. Now he's tethered himself to a half-dead woman. She's a liability, and he's wounded. They won't make 2 miles. What do we do, Bart? We don't ride straight for the seep. We'll cut them off at the pass north of it. It's the only way out. We'll let them have their drink. Let them think they're safe. I want him to have a little hope. It'll make it that much better when I take it away. The 2 miles to the seep were the longest of Juliet's life. Rowan McCabe was a dead weight. He was delirious half the time, muttering names she didn't know and cursing Bart Shaw. But his internal compass was unwavering. Left! He'd gasp. Follow the shadow of that hawk. He's going for the water. Keep low. Juliet's own body was screaming. Her thirst had become a dull, pounding headache. Her legs were jelly. But she had a purpose now. It wasn't just survival. It was defiance. This man, this legend, had trusted her. He had promised her safety, and now she was promising him his life. They found the seep in a shallow cave at the base of the Broken Tooth Mesa. It was barely a trickle of dark, foul-smelling water, greener than it should be. It pooled in a rocky basin, no bigger than a dinner plate. "Don't drink," Rowan panted, collapsing against the rock wall. "Not yet. Fill the canteens." Juliet filled both his large canteen and her own small one. The water was lukewarm and thick with algae. "Now," he said. "Boil it. We need a fire." "A fire sure will see the smoke," she protested. "Not if you do it right." He was an exacting teacher, even on the brink of death. He made her gather dry, dead mesquite wood that would burn hot and fast with little smoke. He had her build the fire deep in the tiny cave. Keep it small, just enough to boil the canteens. They boiled the water, and while it cooled, Rowan gritted his teeth and nodded at his side. Now, the bullet. I can't," Juliet whispered, her stomach turning. "You can," he said, his voice hard. "If you don't, the gangrene will, and we'll both die here. In my pack, my knife, and a flask of corn whiskey. Not for drinking, for cleaning." She did it. Her hands trembled, but she did it. She cut away the stiff buck skin, revealing the swollen purple and black wound. It was festering, the smell horrific. She sterilized Robert's hunting knife in the fire and took a long, shuddering breath. Rowan didn't scream. He just clenched his jaw so hard a muscle in his cheek bulged, and a low, continuous groan vibrated in his chest. Juliet probed for the bullet. She cried as she did it, tears of fear and pity. She finally found it, a flattened piece of lead lodged against a rib. She prized it out. Rowan let out a long, shaky breath. "Now, the whiskey," he roared when she poured it into the open wound, a sound that echoed in the small cave, but it was over quickly. He was slick with sweat and pale as a ghost, but his eyes were clearer. "Good," he panted. "Good. Now, poultice, sagebrush, chew it, make a paste." She did as he said. She packed the wound with the bitter antiseptic paste and bound it with the last of her clean petticoat. They drank the water. It was the most disgusting, most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. Life flowed back into her. They rested for a day, hidden in the cave. They talked. The shared ordeal, the intimacy of the surgery, had broken down all barriers. She told him about Thomas and Robert, about the farm in Illinois they had sold, about the dream of Oregon that had turned into a nightmare. He listened, his gaze never leaving her face. He told her about Shaw. "I testified against him," Rowan said, his voice quiet as he stared at the cave wall. "Stagecoach massacre. He and his brother, they weren't content to just rob. They were cruel. I was the only witness who'd speak. I put Bart in Yuma and his brother on the gallows. He's been hunting me ever since." He blames you for his brother's death. He does. Rowan's face hardened. But I blame myself for that settler train. I was arrogant. I thought I could lead them through Shaw's territory without him knowing. I got 30 people killed or scattered to the wind. You survived, Juliet said. Survival isn't enough. He countered, his voice sharp. Getting you to Fort Harmony. That's a start. That's a piece of it back. On the second morning he was stronger. He could stand leaning on his rifle. The fever from the infection had lessened. We move, he said. North, through the pass. It's the only way. Is it safe? No, Rowan said simply. But it's the only way. Shaw knows it. He'll be waiting, but I know it better. Rowan's strength was an illusion. He was operating on pure will. They traveled for hours, moving through a landscape of canyons and washes, a maze of red rock. Rowan didn't just walk. He scanned, he listened, he tasted the wind. He was teaching Juliet as they went. See the tracks, he'd whisper, pointing to a scrape in the dirt. Deer. Running. Something spooked them. Not us. Something from the east. Shaw, Juliet breathed. Aye, he's close. He's paralleling us. He wants to funnel us into the pass. But you said we're going to the pass. He's expecting us to go through it. We're going over it. He led her up a steep, treacherous goat trail, a path so narrow she had to press her back to the rock wall. Rowan, weak as he was, climbed with a grim determination. The pass was below them, a wide, sandy canyon floor. They were now on the ridge high above it. He'll be waiting at the mouth of the canyon, Rowan panted, collapsing behind a cluster of boulders that gave them a perfect vantage point. He'll wait all day, but he'll get impatient. They waited. The hours ticked by. The sun began its descent, painting the canyon in shades of orange and purple. Juliet's fear was a cold knot in her stomach. What if he doesn't come? He'll come. Just then, 3 riders appeared at the far end of the canyon. Bart Shaw, Dutch Peterson, and Leo Gantry. They stopped their rifles out. He's not here, Bart. Leo's voice drifted up to them. He's given us the slip. He's here. Bart's voice was a low snarl. He dismounted, scanning the canyon walls. He's wounded. He's with the woman. They have to be here. Rowan slowly, carefully lifted his Spencer rifle. He rested the barrel on the boulder. He was 500 yards away. A difficult shot, but not impossible for him. You're going to shoot him, Juliet whispered. I'm going to shoot his horse, Rowan replied. He breathed out, his body perfectly still. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle's crack was deafening, echoing off the canyon walls a dozen times. Down below, Bart Shaw's horse screamed and collapsed. He's up top, Leo yelled, firing wildly at the ridge. Bullets pinged harmlessly off the rock yards away. You fools, Bart roared, diving behind his dead horse for cover. Dutch Leo, get up there. Find them. He's wounded. He can't move fast. Flush him out. I'll cover you from here. The 2 men, Leo and Dutch, spurred their horses into a protected inlet and began to dismount, preparing to climb the rocks. This is it, Rowan said, his voice tight. He levered another round into the chamber. They're splitting up. That's his mistake. He looked at Juliet. His face was grim. I'm going to draw their fire. When I do, I need you to take Robert's revolver crawl 20 yards that way, he pointed, to that overhang. You'll have a clear shot down at the trail they have to take. You have 5 shots. I've never... You don't have to hit them, Rowan said, his blue eyes locking on hers. You just have to make them think they're walking into a crossfire. Make them slow down. Buy me time. He handed her the revolver. Her hand was ice cold. Juliet, he said, his voice suddenly gentle. You gave water to a dead man. You pulled a bullet from a stranger. You can do this. Now go." Juliet crawled. The rock was sharp, tearing at her clothes and the skin on her knees. Every scrape sounded like an avalanche to her. She got to the overhang. Below her she could see Dutch and Leo, climbing, moving from boulder to boulder, separated by 50 feet. Rowan fired again. The shot went wide, intentionally. He was drawing their attention. "He's over there!" Dutch yelled, firing his own rifle at Rowan's position. "I see him!" Leo shouted. "He's pinned down!" Leo Gantry, the rat-faced man, was moving faster. He was on the trail directly below Juliet. He was focused on Rowan. Juliet lifted the heavy revolver with both hands. Her arms shook so badly she could barely aim. She just pointed it down and pulled the trigger. The explosion of the gun surprised her. The recoil slammed her wrist back. The shot was wildly inaccurate, kicking up dust 10 feet to Leo's left. But it worked. Leo froze. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "There's another one, Bart. There's 2 of them." That hesitation was all Rowan McCabe needed. A single shot cracked from his Spencer. Leo Gantry grabbed his chest, looked down at the spreading stain, and tumbled backward off the trail, disappearing into the shadows below. "Leo!" Dutch screamed. He panicked. Instead of finding cover, he turned to run back down the trail. Rowan fired again. The shot hit Dutch in the leg. He screamed and fell, his rifle clattering down the rocks. He was out of the fight. Silence. Down in the canyon, Bart Shaw was motionless behind his dead horse. He had seen both his men go down. He was alone, and he was trapped. "McCabe!" He roared, his voice echoing with pure hatred. "You're still a coward, McCabe, hiding behind a rock, hiding behind a woman. Come down and face me. That's the plan, Bart," Rowan said, loud enough for Shaw to hear. "What are you doing?" Juliet whispered, crawling back to him. "His horse is dead. His men are down." "He's not getting out," Rowan said. His breathing was ragged. The climb and the gunfight had cost him. His wound was bleeding again. "But he's right about one thing. This ends face to face." "Rowan, no. You're hurt. We can just wait." "He's a snake," Rowan said, checking the rounds in his own revolver. "He'll find a way out, or he'll wait us out. We're low on water. This has to end now." Before she could argue, he stood up and began the climb down into the canyon. "Rowan." He ignored her. He was a man on a mission. Juliet, her heart pounding, scrambled after him. They reached the canyon floor. It was twilight now, the light thick and grey. Bart Shaw was standing up away from his horse. He had his revolver in his hand. "So," Bart sneered, "the legend comes down from his mountain, and he brings his little widow with him." "It's over, Bart." Rowan said, his voice flat. He and Shaw were 30 yards apart. "Your men are gone. It's just you." "It was always just me, and you, Rowan." Bart's eyes were shining with a fanatic's light. "You took my brother. You took my freedom. Now I take your life." Bart was faster. He dropped into a crouch and fired. The bullet whined past Rowan's ear. Rowan fired back his shot, truer, clipping Bart in the shoulder. Bart grunted, but didn't go down. He fired again. Rowan felt a white-hot poker slam into his thigh. His leg buckled. He fell to one knee, dropping his rifle. Bart Shaw laughed, a high, terrible sound. He stalked forward, leveling his revolver for the killing shot. "This is for Yuma, you son of a—" "No!" Juliet screamed. She did not fire the revolver. She did the only thing she could. She ran. She ran straight at Bart Shaw, screaming like a banshee, waving her empty hands. The distraction was total. Bart, stunned by this sudden, insane charge, turned his gun toward her. It was the opening Rowan needed. Ignoring the fire in his leg, he lunged forward, not for his rifle, but for the hunting knife at his belt. He tackled Bart Shaw at the waist. The two men went down in a cloud of dust, rolling, cursing, stabbing, punching. It was not a gunfight. It was a brawl. Bart's gun went skittering away. Juliet watched in horror. Bart was bigger, stronger. He gained the upper hand. He pinned Rowan his hands, finding Rowan's throat. Rowan's face began to turn purple. Juliet looked around wildly. The gun. Where was the gun? She saw it lying in the sand near Shaw's dead horse. She scrambled for it. She grabbed it, turned. But she didn't know how to use it. She didn't know if it was loaded. Bart Shaw was squeezing the life from Rowan. Rowan's hands were clawing at Bart's wrists. Juliet didn't think. She just acted. She ran forward and with all her remaining strength brought the heavy steel barrel of the revolver down on the side of Bart Shaw's head. There was a sickening thud. Bart's grip went limp. His eyes rolled up. He slumped to the side unconscious. Rowan McCabe lay on the sand, gasping, coughing, pulling air back into his lungs. He looked at Bart, then at Juliet, who stood over them, shaking the bloody revolver in her hand. Rowan started to laugh, a hoarse, painful sound. "I told you," he choked out, "that you were an absolute fool." He looked at her, and the smile that touched his lips was real. Thank God for that. The silence that fell in the box canyon was heavier than the twilight. It was a suffocating blanket, broken only by three sounds: Rowan McCabe's ragged, desperate, gasping, the pained groans of Dutch Peterson, somewhere on the rocks above, and the sound of Juliet Reed's own heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stood frozen, the heavy revolver still clutched in her hand, its barrel stained. Bart Shaw was a motionless heap at her feet, his breathing shallow but steady. He was alive. Rowan rolled onto his back, coughing, his hand pressed to his throat where Bart's fingers had been. He looked up at her. His face, a pale mask of sweat and dirt in the gloom. His eyes found hers, and the intensity in them was sharp enough to cut. He wasn't looking at her like a savior. He was looking at her like an equal. "Juliet?" He rasped, his voice ruined. The sound of her name broke her paralysis. She let the revolver clatter to the sand. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the ground, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a bone-deep, trembling exhaustion. He's alive," she whispered, staring at Shaw. "Good." Rowan coughed, dragging himself into a sitting position. He grimaced as fresh, dark blood welled from the wound in his thigh. "Dead, he's just a corpse. Alive, he's a bounty." He looked up at the rocks. "And so's Dutch." It took them an hour of grim, painful work in the gathering dark. Juliet, moving as if in a dream, found Rowan's knife. Rowan instructed her, his voice low and tight with pain, how to bind Bart Shaw's hands and feet with his own belt and strips of leather from his saddle. They did the same for Dutch Peterson, who was whimpering, his leg broken and his fight long gone. They dragged the two men to the base of the rock wall, well away from the dead horse. Juliet collected their guns, piling them up. What do we do with them?" she asked. Rowan looked at the men with cold, hard eyes. "In a different time I'd leave them. Let the coyotes be the judge." He looked at Juliet. "But that's not your way. And I reckon it's not mine anymore either." He nodded to his own canteen, which Juliet had refilled at the seep. "Give it to them." "What?" "The canteen. Leave it with them." Juliet stared at him, horrified. "Give away their water again." After all this, Rowan saw the look. "We have their horses, and their canteens. We'll find water." "But them," he grunted, forcing himself to his feet by leaning on his rifle. They're men, not animals. They'll be found. A patrol from Harmony will come looking when we tell them. They deserve to face a judge. Juliet took the canteen, their canteen, the one she had filled, and placed it on the ground, just within Bart Shaw's reach. Shaw's eyes were open, glaring at her, with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. "Someone will find you," Juliet said, her voice shaking but finding a new cold strength. "Or they won't." She met his glare unflinching. "Either way, it's more than you deserve." She turned her back on him. The next challenge was Rowan. He was fading fast. The fight had taken the last of his reserves. The wound in his thigh was bleeding badly, and the old one in his side had torn open. "Can't ride," he muttered, slumping against a rock. You go on, Juliet. Take the horse. Tell them where I am." Juliet looked at the man who had called her a fool, the legend who was now broken and bleeding in the dirt. She thought of her husband, Robert, whispering, "Go on, Julie." She had, and she had regretted it every second. "No," she said. The word was flat, final. "Juliet, don't be. Be quiet, Rowan," she said, cutting him off. She was no longer taking orders. She walked to Bart Shaw's horse, a sturdy-looking roan. She brought it over her movements, deliberate. "You are not dying here. You promised me Fort Harmony." I can't mount," he admitted, his head sagging. "I didn't ask if you could," she said. "I'll get you up." It was a nightmare, a grunt-filled, agonizing struggle. She used a rock as a mounting block, half lifting, half dragging the semi-conscious scout onto the saddle. He roared in pain as his leg was jostled, but she was relentless. She tied him to the saddle with a length of rope from Shaw's bedroll, binding his torso to the pommel so he wouldn't fall. She packed his wounds with the last of the sagebrush. Then she mounted the other horse, Dutch's mare, taking the reins of Rowan's roan. She put Robert's rifle across her lap, took one last look at the dark, silent canyon, and nudged the mare west. This time she wasn't following a map. She was following the stars, just as Rowan had taught her. The North Star, her new fixed point. Those 4 days were a blur of sun and dust, cold nights and terror. Rowan was delirious. He raved, his voice a dry rasp. He argued with Bart Shaw. He called out names: Leo, Dutch, Thomas, and he sometimes spoke to his horse as if it were a person. But through it all, Juliet rode on. She nursed him. She untied him when they stopped, cleaned his wounds with the brackish water from Shaw's canteens, and forced sips of it between his lips. She hunted. A day out from the canyon, she saw a rabbit, and with a single steady shot from Robert's rifle, she killed it. She cooked it over a small, smokeless fire, just as Rowan had shown her, and fed him the broth. She was no longer Juliet Reed, the farmer's widow. That woman was dead buried back on the trail with her husband and son. A new woman sat on this horse. This woman was a survivor. She was a nurse. She was a hunter. She was a guide. On the 4th morning, the landscape began to change. The red rock and alkali flats gave way to sparse, dry grassland. The air felt different, thicker. And then she saw it. It was just a dark line on the hazy, sun-bleached horizon, a smudge of civilization. But as they drew closer, the smudge resolved into the high wooden palisades of Fort Harmony. Juliet Reed stopped her horse. She looked at the flag, a tiny speck of red, white, and blue flapping in the distance. The sight of it, the promise of safety, of water, of people, broke something inside her. The tears came. Not the gentle tears of grief she had shed before. This was a storm, a raw, racking deluge of sobs that tore up from her very soul. She wept for Thomas. She wept for Robert. She wept for the woman she had been, and for the sheer, terrible cost of becoming the woman she was now. She wept until she was empty, hollowed out, and cleansed by the grief. When she was done, she wiped her face on her sleeve, straightened her back, and kicked her horse into a steady walk. She rode straight through the main gates. Blue-uniformed soldiers stopped and stared at the grim sight. A woman caked in dirt and dried blood, looking like a ghost, leading a horse that carried the half-dead, tied-down body of the most famous scout in the territory. Get the doctor," she croaked. "It's Rowan McCabe." The name electrified the small garrison. Men rushed forward. "McCabe, my God, what happened?" "He's been shot," Juliet said, her voice barely a whisper as she slid from the saddle. Her legs buckled, and a sergeant had to catch her. "Twice. The first one, it's infected." They cut Rowan down, his body slumping limp. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, his eyes flickered open. They were hazy with fever, but they found her. He fumbled for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He grabbed her wrist. "Juliet?" He whispered the sound, barely audible. "I'm here, Rowan," she said, leaning close. "You're safe. We're safe." His cracked lips pulled back in a semblance of a smile. "You got us. Here." He breathed each word an effort. "You're a guide, Juliet Reed." His eyes closed. His hand went limp. He was gone, back into the darkness. Juliet stayed at the fort for a week. The commanding officer gave her quarters, and the surgeon's wife gave her a dress. She scrubbed the desert from her skin, but she knew it would never leave her. She reported the location of Shaw and Peterson, and a patrol was dispatched, returning 3 days later with the 2 men alive and in irons. She spent most of her time sitting in the infirmary, watching Rowan sleep. The surgeon, a gruff, overworked army doctor named Peterson, had been blunt. "He's lucky," Peterson said, wiping his hands on a bloody apron after the long surgery. The bullet in his leg was clean, missed the bone. But this side wound, my word. He looked at her with new respect. "The poultice you made that sagebrush paste, it kept the gangrene at bay. It's the only reason I was able to save the leg, and him. Another day he'd have been gone." Rowan recovered with the same stubbornness he did everything else. The legend, it turned out, was mostly grit. On the 8th day, Juliet walked in to find him sitting up in his cot, his side heavily bandaged, and his leg propped up on a pillow. His piercing blue eyes were clear, the fever gone. "I'm leaving," she said, standing at the foot of his bed. He just looked at her, taking in the clean dress the way she stood tall. "Where to?" "There's a wagon train heading north to Oregon in 2 days. The trail master, a man named Henderson, said they're letting me join. I can work for my passage." "Good," Rowan said. He nodded to the floor beneath his cot. "My pack. Hand it to me." She brought it over. He reached inside and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. It clinked with the sound of coin. He tossed it to her. It was heavy in her hands. Juliet opened it. It was full of gold coins, double eagles, more money than she had ever seen. "I can't take this," she said immediately, trying to hand it back. "It's my fee," he said, his voice firm. "My pay for guiding that settler train. The one I failed. This is not my money, Rowan. This is yours." "No, it's not," he insisted. His eyes were sharp, analytical, as if he were reading a trail. "Yes, it is. I promised to get you to safety. But you're the one who faced Shaw. You're the one who pulled the bullet. You're the one who got us here when I was ready to die in that canyon." He leveled his gaze at her. "That's scout's pay, Juliet. You earned it." Juliet hesitated. She looked at the gold. It was not a handout. It was not charity. It was a wage. It was her future. The farm in Oregon, it was no longer a desperate dream. It was a possibility. She closed her hand around the pouch and nodded once. "Thank you, Rowan." "No," he said, his voice softening. "Thank you, Juliet." A silence settled between them, the comfortable silence of two people who had seen the brink and pulled each other back. "I have to ask," he said finally. "That water, back on the Devil's Anvil, why did you really do it? The truth." Juliet thought for a moment. She thought of Robert and of Thomas. She thought of her Bible of the sermons on charity. But those weren't the real reasons. The real reason was simpler, more elemental. She met his gaze. "Because I was thirsty," she said, "and I knew what it felt like." A slow smile of profound understanding spread across Rowan McCabe's face. He nodded slowly. He understood completely. "Good luck in Oregon, Juliet Reed. Good luck, Rowan McCabe." She left him there. Juliet walked out of the dim infirmary and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the fort's parade ground. She was no longer a victim. She was not just a widow. She was a woman with a rifle on her back, a pouch of earned gold in her pocket, and a future she had carved out of rock and dust and blood with her own 2 hands. She had shared her last drop of water, and in doing so had found an ocean of strength she never knew she had. The story of Juliet Reed begins at the absolute end of everything she knew. She was a woman hollowed out by grief lost in a desert, the Devil's Anvil that was as empty as her future. She possessed nothing but a single sip of water, the last fragile thread separating her from her own grave. In that final moment, faced with a dying stranger, she made a choice that defies every instinct of survival. She chose humanity over herself. By pouring out that last drop of water, an act that Rowan McCabe himself would later call absolute foolishness, she unknowingly sparked her own salvation. This single act of pure, selfless compassion set in motion a harrowing chain of events that would forge her into someone new. Juliet didn't just save a legend. She was forced to become one. She transformed from a victim of the trail into a master of her own destiny, facing down the brutal Bart Shaw, not with a scout's skill, but with a survivor's desperate courage. Her journey is a powerful testament that our true character is not revealed in comfort, but at the very brink of oblivion. It teaches us that the human heart, even when broken, can refuse to harden, and that the smallest act of grace can echo across the most brutal wasteland and change the course of a life. If this story of profound sacrifice, incredible grit, and the resilience of the human spirit resonated with you, we would be so grateful for your support. Please take a moment to hit that like button and share this video with someone in your life who appreciates a powerful story of true courage. And if you want to ensure you never miss another story of real-life drama and the unshakable human will to survive, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell. Your support allows us to keep bringing these amazing tales to you. Thank you for watching. The main characters in this story are Juliet Reed, the resilient widow who shares her last drop of water. Rowan McCabe, the legendary scout she saves, also known as Grit McCabe. Bart Shaw, the story's main antagonist, the ruthless gang leader hunting Rowan.